we're going to be talking some more with Sonia about some of the advocacy efforts happening in Philadelphia right now, the history of the advocacy that's happening in response to threatened gardens, in response to gentrification and neighborhood displacement, and in response to land dispossession in the city. So, Sonia, I would love it if you could talk a little bit about what are some of the current advocacy efforts in response to what is happening in Philly around threatened gardens, gardens being sold, sheriff sales, and those kinds of things?
Whew, it kind of feels like a moving target, because I think the city also has shifted in their policies around land. So there we did have a Threatened Gardens campaign in, I believe, 2017, 2018, where we were targeting councilmanic prerogative, which we discussed, and asking for that to be discontinued. We were asking for a moratorium on all sheriff sales of existing gardens. And then we were also asking the land bank to improve their transparency and their accountability in the way that they are sort of, operating to not just give land to, like developers and affordable housing, but to also include urban agriculture in their efforts. And to also follow through on the things that they had already committed to doing. So, and on one end, it's like trying to plug the leak of how these gardens are being sold up and disposed of. And then the other is trying to hold accountable the infrastructure that's been put into place to sort of help gardeners have a pathway towards land security and land ownership. Um, I think that in spite of our efforts, all three of those issues are still existing problems, right? And it has been challenging for the same reasons that we talked about a little bit earlier around like the hot potatoing of responsibility, but also because, recently the landholding agencies consolidated, and so now there's even less transparency around how land decisions are being made. And so, I think the ongoing work right now has been a little bit more on the reform side of the work, like a little less radical, a little bit more on the reform side, where soil generation, with you, Ash, we have been working on the urban agriculture strategic plan for the Department of Parks and Rec. It is an exciting opportunity because it's the first time a grassroots organization is being asked to participate in this process, alongside an urban planning firm, Interface Studios. But to have a grassroots voice at the table as experts on the issue, as most impacted people, is huge. And so we've diligently been working on that plan for the last 2 years, and we're nearly finished. And it's a very comprehensive, plan that really addresses inequity throughout the food system, because we can't silo urban agriculture when we see the ways that it's interconnected with all of these other facets of our society. Um, but that doesn't really address, right, like the ongoing urgent land insecurity that people are experiencing. And so on that side, I think we're still organizing to understand like what's happening at the sheriff's sales, to communicate with the sheriff's office, um, and trying to push for a moratorium on sales of active gardens. I think we're really trying to get people to understand that um, gardens exist. First of all, that gardens exist. Second, that gardens are valuable spaces that deserve to be preserved, and to then separate the disposition of land that's vacant and unused from the disposition of like land where there are existing gardens. Um, yeah, yeah.
Thank you. Yes. So you talked a little bit about pushing for that moratorium on sheriff sale, and I remember back in, I think it was April or May of this year, the city council in Philadelphia organized a hearing to specifically talk about sheriff sales. because they were considering moving share sale from in person to virtual. And with that came a lot of potential issues and challenges related to, if you move in on virtual, then anybody across the world has the opportunity to bid on and purchase land in Philadelphia, regardless of, whether or not they're from here, they live here, whatever. So, and with soil generation, specifically Katrina Baxter, and me testify at that hearing. Trying to help people see like the importance and the value of the gardens that we are a part of, the work that gardens help to facilitate, that it is transformational for communities, that is healing for communities, that is beyond physical healing, emotional, spiritual, all of that. So my experience and my interpretation of how that went, there were a lot of people on city council, not a lot, there was a handful of people on city council who seemed to like not have fully understood or realized the impacts of gardens and like actually what they mean to people. Although I'm sure there's so many who do and don't care. And what came up for me is like there's a tension between seeing this is impactful, beneficial to community members, but also wanting to hold on to your power and not wanting to release some of that power. So, through that hearing and, all of the testimonies that were offered that day, we were able to get a temporary moratorium on all sheriff sales. And that moratorium ended in September. I think it was September 10th of this year. So now we are somewhat back into the same situation where, land, homes, gardens are being put up for sheriff sale. So there's a lot of work on the advocacy side to figure out how to get those gardens off. Well, first get gardens noticed, but I think for me, the more important thing is like, how do we make sure that gardens are not on sheriff sale at all? What mechanisms can we put in place to protect the growing spaces that communities have cared for? So
Yeah,
yeah,
it's baffling.
go ahead.
It's baffling. I was just gonna say because, there's a lot of quote unquote vacant land in the city, and the percentage that is gardens is so small. It's so fractional, you know, and it's not as if I think there's like over 40,000 vacant lots in the city, and we're talking about less than 900 parcels, right? Like
Yep.
it's really mind-blowing to think about the scale of impact urban agriculture has, but also the like scope of vacant land that we're even asking for to be protected. And even
Mm-hmm.
still, there's this challenge. And I think you're right about the tension between understanding that this is valuable to community, but then also like not wanting to give up power. So I feel like there's definitely a willful ignorance that's happening. Um, and so again, we're back to the beginning of the conversation, which is that narrative is our biggest challenge. Um, and so, I hope that, politically, urban agriculture is growing as a
Mm-hmm.
constituency that's being taken seriously. We've quite literally been told by lawmakers there is no urban ag constituency, right? And leadership has been very dismissive and patronizing to our movement,
Mm-hmm.
as if we are hobbyists that are crying about having our toys being taken away. And it's utterly disrespectful at this point, because
Disrespectful.
yeah, it is disrespectful. And I think we don't have to be shy about naming that it is offensive. It is now an offensive attack because a part of what has been challenging with the advocacy work is feeling like our advocacy is informing our own oppression. We say, hey,
Okay.
these are our pain points. This is what you can do to help us. And then feeling like those pain points are being taken and then
Yes.
exacerbated, right? Like that's what we're
Mm-hmm.
experiencing.
So I'm so glad you brought that up, because one thing I was gonna say is that, there's some segment where there's willful ignorance that exists, and there's also a very real segment where there's intentional harm being done at this point, right? So we are not trying to um paint a picture that all city council just don't know, or all people at the land bank just don't know, or city agencies just don't understand. And a lot of them understand and are intentionally using their platforms and their power to like harmfully and negatively impact our movement and our garden spaces.
It's heavy and it's challenging, and I think it's very it's challenging to not get demoralized by this work. And I think too, like, something that we're trying to understand is how to sustain this work, because it's a marathon. And so when's the right time to pass the baton? Because no one
Hmm.
person can run all legs of this race, and feeling like your work is literally informing your oppression is, how do you move forward after that, and so I think being able to rest gives us a chance to also reflect on the way that we have been able to move the meter, because
Yeah.
it's not as if it's all in vain, right? There is a lot of work that's being done and a progress that's being made. um, but I will say, on the front of like land security and access to land, like, that has been a tick that has been so hard to push,
Hmm.
and uh, energetically, like spiritually, I have to tell myself, like, equal and opposite reaction, like, it must be really hard and they must be holding on for dear life to this power, because is that real? Like, Black
Yes.
people having food sovereignty and land security is truly regenerative to the economy,
Hmm.
to the wellness of the community, to culture, to identity, to collective political power. And
To
therefore,
the
that's
planet,
why, right. And that's why y'all,
to the
like,
literally
that's why y'all don't want us
ecology.
to have it. Right,
Yep.
exactly. So, I try to let the pushback that is so demoralizing sometimes, like, I like to use the word metabolize lately, because there's always going to be like poison in the world, right? It's not about getting rid
Mhm.
of the poison in the world, it's about transmuting it. So how can I transmute this, struggle into power? And that's to recognize that, like, y'all wouldn't react this way if it wasn't the real deal.
Mhm.
So, the fight continues.
Absolutely. And I mean, everything that you said, like, it is hard and it is heavy and it is sometimes discouraging, but the pushback is also the hope for me, right? It's the fuel. It's like that means we we ain't making this up. We doing the work that they don't want us to do, because it, like you said, it is regenerative, and it'll quite literally heal people, heal, our relationships with each other, with the land, our spiritual relationships with the creator. It will heal so many things. And
And it's
the
affirming
powers that be
that.
may not be ready.
Exactly. I was just going to say, I think a part of this work is having to be really frank about the reality that there are classes of people who benefit from the status quo being the way that it is. And it is not in their self-interest to radically change the status quo. And so the folks that suffer, the folks that, whose expense it is, the status quo stay as it is, like, you don't want these people to be literate in their own struggle. You don't want that, you know? And so just naming that, I think too, has been a part of, our awareness in leveraging what we like to call the radical Black voice, like, I think
Hmm.
being able to tell our story and our perspective and our direct experience with how we interface with power structures is crucial. In these times of anti-racism, being more and more centered, there's talks about redistribution of wealth, redistribution of
Mm,
power. And I like to say, where's the redistribution of leisure? Where's the redistribution of comfort?
mm,
Because I will not code switch to make you comfortable. I'm not going to tell my story differently to make you feel better. I'm not going to protect your feelings when my feelings have never ever ever been centered or protected. It's been at the expense of my well-being and my feelings up until this point, right? So I think too, power in numbers and how we show up and sharing the political knowledge and language, and then to then infiltrate these spaces and to reclaim comfortability is huge, you know, even in challenging things like professionalism, like how that concept in and of itself is oppressive. And to say like, actually no, like this North Philly native does not need to speak academic English from a university for you to understand, and for this narrative to be valid, for this experience to actually
mhm.
be centered as expertise in this issue. So yeah, radical Black voice, redistribution of comfort, and validating direct experience as expertise is like real strategies that we take on in any kind of mostly white institutional power space that we enter.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's a perfect segue to wrap us up, because I wanted to talk about some calls to action, or just ways that people who might be watching this, who, are unfamiliar with agriculture, but interested in getting into it, Black folks, immigrant folks, or people who just want to support the movement. Are there things that come to mind for you as like a top few items that people can do, read or whatever, to really support the work that you and all of us are trying to do and are doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So three organizations are coming in mind, and I'm going to go from like national to like Philly to like even more specific. So I think nationally, Climate Justice Alliance, CJA, is an excellent organization to learn from, to give to. CJA is constantly giving out micro and larger grants to local organizations that are doing grassroots work on the ground. But they are also very much Black and Indigenous led, and they have a vision for what they call a just transition model, which are through the eyes and dreams of Black and Brown and Indigenous people. So I really love learning from CJA. I use CJA a lot for my own political education, and as Soil Generation benefits a lot from our affiliation with CJA. Then there's Soil Generation. Um, you are more than welcome to donate to us. We also just published an agroecology manual that's available online. And hopefully we'll have like hard copies available soon too. But it's a manual that we created. It's about 100 pages, and it's got a bit about our history, farming techniques and practices, and then also our community organizing strategies. Um, so please like check us out. Follow us on Instagram. It's just Soil Generation. Our website is www.soilgeneration.org. And then to get even more hyper local, I've heard about this great organization named Land Based Johns, um, created by my lovely friend and colleague, Ashley Griffith. That's really a wonderful program that is bringing femmes and women, Black women, natives of Philly together to learn land based skills, not just limited to farming, but things like building a shelter and self defense and foraging for food. And something I really appreciate, Ash, is your neglect of the word survival skills. I feel like that's a very sort of frankly white language around what is just traditional land-based knowledge, right?
Mhm.
And so yeah, land-based Johns, yo, like please like donate,
Yeah.
support the next cohort for the next season. I really
Mhm.
admire the work that you do, Ash. And any chance I get, land-based Johns is on my list to promote. So that gives you a funnel of like scale to kind of give to.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Sonia, for again all of the you are brilliant, and I love learning from you. Since we embarked on this journey a few years ago to do this reform work that we thought was going to be radical, that's actually reform, but you know. It has been such an honor and pleasure to learn from you. And you've taught us so much just in what, 15 minutes, 30 minutes today. So I'm really grateful, and I just want to express my gratitude to you for your generosity of spirit, of knowledge, of wisdom, and of care. And hopefully, folks watching this will walk away with new knowledge, with new steps of ways to support this work, ways to get involved with this work if that's appropriate. And yeah, if ever anybody has questions who's watching this, feel free to reach out. There'll be some contact information listed, as well as some links and some readings and ways to continue to stay up to date on what's happening in Philadelphia and beyond. So thank you, Sonia, and thank you everyone for watching. Um, I'm starting my day off very full.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. It's always a privilege to be in any space with you. So I'm so grateful to have had a platform to share, and I look forward to more.
Yes, let's do it.